Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Politics Lab on YouTube. My name is Bill Muck. I'm a professor of political science at North Central College, and I'm joined, as always, by my colleague, best friend, and 1986 Texas calculator champ, Dr. Phil Barker, who's a professor of political science at Keene State College. Hey, Phil.
Hey, Bill. How's it going?
It's good. We haven't talked about your calculator skills much on the podcast yet.
Sadly, the year is wrong, but everything else about that statement is true.
What year was it?
1994.
Oh, that's right. You're so
The
young.
glory days. Yeah.
So, well, all right. Well, we're here today to talk a bit about Russia and recent developments there. So, opposition leader or figure Alexei Navalny, who was poisoned by Putin and his Russian regime, recently came back to Russia, has been arrested. It's led to protests over the weekend and some really interesting wrinkles for democracy. So, Phil, what are we to make of all these interesting developments in Russia?
I think first of all, what you were saying, you were trying to figure out what to call him. I think we can call Navalny the opposition leader now. I mean, I think this kind of cements that role for him in some ways. But I mean, first of all, we have to talk about the fact that the guy got poisoned.
Yeah.
Not indisputably, but like 99.9% indisputably
Yes.
by Vladimir Putin, gets hauled off to Germany where he's in a coma, recovers for a couple of months, and then goes back. Like that's
You wouldn't go
what
back.
you would do. I would never do it, but you would, Bill.
No way.
No, it really is remarkable. I mean, it's like it's hard to kind of wrap your head around that decision, knowing that he was going to get arrested. The Putin had made it clear that he would get arrested when he comes back. So, yeah, I mean, I think the significance of it is that he called for, knowing he was going to get arrested when he arrived, he called for demonstrations, because he's for a long time come out and basically said, this is, although Russia is a democracy, that it's an authoritarian government, right? And so if you want your voice heard, it has to be in the streets. And so he was calling for people to take to the streets, and they did in massive numbers. Like the numbers about, like the stats on who came out, I mean, rolling across the country, hundreds of over 100 cities, and a huge chunk of the people had never protested before. That's the other thing, is you have to put yourself in the mindset of someone who's going out to protest in Russia, right? This is not, it's not, that takes risk in and of itself. So the fact that so many people did says something about the current situation, or I don't know. It seems like maybe Putin's grasp on power, I'm not going to say it's tenuous, but it's more tenuous than it's ever been right now. That doesn't mean that I expect him to fall apart, but there is like movement, right? This is kind of I don't know. This hasn't happened before for a reason. What do you think? Do you think this says something about the current state of things?
Yeah, and I think Navalny, he deserves a lot of credit for being so clever, right? So he's known for his YouTube videos. He uses the internet to be a thorn in the side of Vladimir Putin, and he knows how to use social media to connect with people where it puts Putin in a really awkward position. So, Navalny knew he'd be arrested, but he's used this as a way of getting more protest out, and he's kind of boxed Putin in.
Yeah.
Because as you said, no, Russia wants to appear to be a democracy, even though they clearly are not a democracy, but they don't want to be perceived as China. Right? I mean, China would just lock him up and you never see him again. So Russia wants to create the appearance that they're a democracy, which means they have to handle him delicately, because now he's become a huge star. And so I guess I'm a bit in awe at how well he's played Putin. Normally Putin is really, really good at this stuff. And so he's been clever about how he's used this to kind of rattle the political system. Now, it doesn't mean he'll be successful, but as you noted, these are some of the biggest protests they've seen in years.
Yeah, you're right. That the move on his part is pretty brilliant, right? Because if he comes back and Putin does nothing and lets him wander the streets, that brings into question Putin's power and grasp of things. But throwing him in prison makes him a martyr, right? It makes him a symbol of the fact that Putin is not a Democrat, a small d Democrat. And so it will be really interesting to see how this plays out. And you talked about his use of online, of YouTube and stuff like that. It really is brilliant. And that's another aspect of sort of modern day politics that we're still, I think, coming to grips with, and to some extent, because in the 10 years that Navalny's been doing this sort of stuff, it's the spread of the internet in Russia has been extensive. So his reach has gone from, basically Moscow and St. Petersburg to the whole country. And so this is the sort of thing that makes it difficult. We've seen this play out in other places. It makes it really difficult for an authoritarian government, unless you're going to go the route of China and just
Yeah.
totally squash online speech. It's harder and harder to get away with some of the stuff that Putin has gotten away with.
Well, it also makes the Russian regime look really bad that they didn't kill the guy, right? I mean, so our listeners may not know this, but Navalny actually tricked individuals who were involved in the poisoning. He did a prank call and pretended to be somebody else, and they admitted what they were doing. Apparently, they put the nerve agent in his underwear. I mean,
Yes.
but so Russia does this a lot, but not everybody they poison dies. And so apparently, there's this joke in Russia that that we can't even poison people correctly, right? So that's a reflection on the regime that we're probably going to be poisoned because we're putting this out there, Bill. We should be careful.
We can't go to Russia for a conference ever, Bill.
That's exactly right. But it really, I mean, it says something about a regime has this long history, that they're perceived as ineffective. And Putin's popularity was very, very high after the Ukraine annexation or usurpation of them, but it's declined since then. And so Putin's got to think about popularity. Navalny only gets his approval ratings are the 20-25%, but it doesn't take much for suddenly that to skyrocket if Putin doesn't handle this well. So I'm in awe of how well and how clever he's been to put a really good autocratic leader in a box.
And I think that's the other part is, I think, there's a lot of people who study authoritarianism. It's not my, area of expertise, but I think there's lots of factors that you can see that contribute to, stress and strain on an authoritarian government. But oftentimes the collapse comes pretty suddenly, right? And so this is, you would have to assume that this makes Putin nervous to some extent. I'm sure he's not losing a whole lot of sleep over it, but yeah, I mean, it's a pattern that we haven't seen in Russia in a long time. This extensive of a protest, and it's encouraging.
Well, autocratic leaders, they can't go away quietly. History has taught us that they either are captured and imprisoned, or they're forced to flee to some other country. So Putin, I mean, he's just set up the constitution where he can run and stay in office for, I can't remember how long. I mean, it's for a long period of time. But even though the constitution allows him to stay, it'll be the people that really allow this or don't allow this. So that'll be really fascinating to watch, to see whether this is just a little blip or whether it balloons into something bigger. I mean, it could be like Belarus or what we're seeing in Hong Kong, where it becomes a wide-scale, massive protest. And it's unclear whether this has that legs, but the fact that, like you said, over 100 protests, tens of thousands of people showing up, it's a really big deal.
Yeah, I agree. It'll be fascinating to watch over the next couple of months how people were showing up in like negative 60-degree conditions and stuff to protest. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see if it's sustainable, or if Putin manages to squash this and retain his control the way he has in the past.
That's another reason I wouldn't show up to a protest. If it's negative 60, if there's a chance I could be poisoned with nerve agent, all of the reasons I'll stay in my basement.
So many reasons. You're a political scientist.
Yes. Well, that's probably a good point to wrap up on. You should tune in to the podcast this Wednesday. We've got Professor Suzanne Chad on to talk about all things about the American election, the Biden administration, Georgia. We're going to break it all down. It should be a lot of fun, Phil.
I can't wait. I'll look forward to it, and I'll see you on Wednesday, Bill.
All right. See you, Phil.